The tragic event between Rob Reiner and his wife rocked Hollywood about 3 weeks ago. However, the more you dig, the more layers of silent anguish and terrifying secrets that were never revealed come to light. Few people are aware that Rory, the daughter of Rob and Michelle, wasn't the one who called for help that day, despite the headlines focusing on the shock. The whole story is hidden in the quiet corners, where the family's anguish and terror have persisted for years. Her entire world fell apart as soon as she entered the mansion. She was stunned by what she witnessed. Unable to even form words, she fell to the ground. In reality, it was her companion who picked up the phone and dialed for assistance. However, that is only the start. Rob's silent pleas for assistance, his late-night confessions to close friends about the stress at home, his developing terror of his own son, and the unsettling fact that police had been summoned to their idyllic Brentwood house multiple times, were all hidden beneath the surface of this tragedy. It appeared to be a model Hollywood family from the outside. Something was slowly disintegrating inside. The Reiners didn't merely cover up their suffering. They silently dealt with it every day, acting as though nothing was wrong. Every missing piece in this tale leads to a fresh revelation that will cause you to pause and consider how much you actually know. It all began with a massage. That calm Sunday afternoon, December 14th, 2025, the therapist showed up to the Reiner mansion. She was present at the weekly appointment that Rob and Michelle always attended. However, nobody opened the door this time. The next thing she learned would alter everything. It had always been a standing session that took place between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock p.m. However, I felt that perhaps the entire film was Rob accepting that unavoidable reality on that peaceful Sunday afternoon. And no amount of joy or pride, no matter how well-deserved, could bring light to that harsher, darker reality. Right from the beginning, as soon as the massage therapist got to the Reiner, there was silence when the bell was rung at the family's immaculate white gate. Nothing, no footsteps, no response. The therapist's worry gradually turned into fear after repeatedly knocking and unsuccessfully calling Rob and Michelle. She called their daughter, Rob Reiner, who lived a short distance away, in a desperate attempt to get help. The first clue that things wasn't right was that silence, that weird, unnatural quiet. Romy made no hesitation. Anticipating a minor miscommunication or a missed call, she hurried to her parents' estate. But her life will always be divided into before and after because of what was waiting for her inside. When she unlocked that front door, she felt a little uncomfortable, but not scared. However, everything changed the instant her eyes met what was inside. She utterly froze. Rob Reiner, her father, was laying there still. Her surroundings came to a halt. A scene like that is beyond human preparation. What she was seeing was beyond the comprehension of her intellect. Her body moved more quickly than her mind could keep up as she yelled, terrified, and fled the house. She was unaware that her mother, Michelle, was also missing in another area of the mansion during that chaotic moment. Contrary to popular belief, Romy did not make the 911 call. Who did it then? And why is that particular element so important? It turns out that when she went inside that residence, she wasn't by herself. A close male friend who was then very involved in Romy's personal and professional life had accompanied her. Shortly after entering the house, he was the one who reached for his phone and made that vital emergency call. Many times, this one fact has been misinterpreted, yet it's crucial to realize that psychological shock defies reason. He had tried everything to support his son when the human brain was struck by something intolerable. To assist his kid, he had even started the Hollywood machine. Nevertheless, he was powerless to assist his son completely. There are some things we can't do our best. That is devastating. That's difficult. It turns off. People instinctively run, scream, or freeze. It's not a sign of guilt to be unable to call 911 at that precise moment. It is an indication of trauma. Reason simply vanishes when fear and incredulity overwhelm your thinking. According to early accounts, Romy had found both of her parents at the same time, which further complicated matters. However, that is untrue. That day was the only time she saw her father. Police had already arrived when she received the heartbreaking news about her mother. Thus, she was struck with not one, but two shocks that changed my life. Before she could even start to heal from the previous one, she had to endure each one. And for that reason, the man who accompanied her took on such a crucial role. He wasn't merely a casual buddy or bystander. He was a significant figure in Romy's creative life and went by the name of Alex Silberg. Throughout her career, she relied on, worked with, and trusted this person. One of the most important and misinterpreted aspects of the whole narrative would be his appearance that day. Alex and Romy were more than simply buddies. They collaborated creatively to create something. The two have been collaborating on a short film project in which Alex was the director, while Romy was the main character. Long trips, common routines, and a rhythm that quietly and unspokenly linked their lives had all contributed to the development of their relationship over the years. One thing was certain, even if it was never officially acknowledged whether it was friendship or something more, they had total faith in one another. Romy immediately gained attention after the tragedy was made public, something that practically always occurs in a significant investigation. Yes, it's difficult because it feels so natural to be a parent. As a parent, you are aware that everyone encounters this situation with a child at some point, where you wish for things to be true, that you believe you are capable of. You can't let things happen. Knowing that there are some things that are beyond your control can also make you feel the most vulnerable and insecure as a parent. Absolutely. It's scary, you know. She lived close by. She was the first person on the scene and the first to arrive. These basic data are sufficient for investigators to begin asking inquiries in situations such as this one, because that's how all serious cases start, not because of accusations. Who was nearest? Who was the first to arrive? Who witnessed what? And Alex's presence became vitally important at that point. From an emotional and legal perspective, he served as the anchor, helping to clarify the events of that day. He wasn't merely an observer. Romy's actions, time frame, emotional state, and reaction during those horrifying moments could all be verified by him. His remarks made it easier to see the big picture. Romy wasn't acting weirdly or aimlessly. She stayed at his side the whole time. One of the main factors that allowed the police to swiftly rule out any suspicions against Romy was Alex's testimony. Things might have easily turned gloomier without him. He was able to depict the fright, horror, and complete emotional collapse that overcame her when she saw her, even while hearsay and conjecture clouded fact. Dead, demonstrating unequivocally that what she went through was genuine human sorrow rather than lies or calculating. Because truth may be quickly perverted in situations like these. Innocent people may be drawn into unjustified storms when information moves more quickly than facts. That was prevented by Alex's presence. He was more than a witness. In the days that followed, when everything around Romy was crumbling, he served as one of her few emotional pillars. Nick, her brother, appeared to be moving farther away from social interactions in the meantime. He frequently kept to himself, didn't seem to have a reliable support system, and wasn't working consistently. Romy, however, continued to move. In an attempt to maintain some semblance of normalcy among the commotion, she continued to work on projects. Their differences, her quiet fortitude, and his increasing loneliness, created the impression of two brothers who lived in the same world but took completely different routes. Sometimes the people who remain by someone's side speak louder than words in the minutes following a catastrophe. And in Romy's situation, that someone was Alex, the person who was physically and emotionally closest to her when her world fell apart. However, rumors started circulating almost right away. Misreported statements and online discussion filled the conversation within hours. Some even started claiming that Romy had identified her brother Nick as a potential suspect. However, that was untrue. Not at all. Romy never placed blame on anyone from the start. A combination of panic, disjointed reporting, and conjecture that spread more quickly than confirmed information led to the confusion. Before anyone could even breathe, what had begun as rumors swiftly became headlines, distorting the truth. What police and rescue personnel discovered upon first arriving at the Reiner residence was devastating. However, the information in those early reports provided a more accurate picture of what had transpired. In spite of all the circulating speculations, Romy's behavior at the scene was composed, truthful, and based more on astonishment than suspicion. She made no accusations or finger-pointing. She merely said that her brother, Nick, lived on the property when describing the family's living situation. It wasn't a statement. It was background information designed to give responders an idea of who could have been home on that particular day. Her statements revealed a person in profound emotional shock who was clinging to hard facts because the rest was too much to take in. Major media later reported that Romy never instructed police to look into her brother, including the New York Times, The Guardian, and The Independent. All she told was what she knew. Detectives then constructed their own case, which ultimately resulted in their finding and apprehending Nick later, that same night, in the vicinity of Los Angeles' Exposition Park. However, Romy's emotional burden continued to increase, while law enforcement pursued its path. Public conjecture scrutinized, questioned, and perverted every sentence she made, including the pauses in between. Every look and hesitancy seemed to be something to analyze. Already, she was in shock at an unimaginable loss. However, she was suddenly ensnared in a web of scrutiny where any phrase may be misinterpreted. It's simple to forget that every headline represents a person attempting to get through their darkest hour. Losing her parents wasn't the only thing that affected Romy. The idea that someone she grew up with whom she shared all of her childhood memories, would have been able to cross a boundary she couldn't even fathom was something she had to confront. Nick's erratic behavior and episodes of devastation associated with his addiction have long plagued the family. Long nights, yelling matches, and broken furniture were nothing new. However, nobody could have predicted what transpired that day. It broke the line between fear and worry. Romy brought up one little but crucial point when she spoke with the police. Her parents and Nick had attended a get-together the previous evening at the house of a mutual friend. That bit of knowledge assisted investigators in tracking down the last actions that preceded the disaster. However, Romy experienced yet another round of heartache as a result. The instant she found out that her brother had been arrested, she carried two different kinds of pain after that day. The tragic breakdown of her relationship with her only sibling and the irreversible loss of her parents. It became impossible to separate those two sorrows. Every love memory is tainted by uncertainty and sorrow. Each day that went by made her view the past through a different prism, one that was tinged with doubt, sorrow, and unsolved problems. The Reiner family's Brentwood estate appeared tranquil, gated, opulent, and calm from the outside. However, the mood within those walls had been hostile for years. There was always a sense of unease about Nick's presence, like when you walk into a house that was built on shaky foundation. Everyday life was about keeping an eye on emotions, reducing stress, and praying that things wouldn't get out of control. This trend dated back more than 10 years, according to police documents. August 2013 was the first call. Early one morning, a welfare check was conducted because someone thought someone inside might be in danger. Neighbors complained of loud nighttime disruptions 6 months later. However, the mansion was quiet once more by the time the police arrived. These visits eventually became virtually daily. The gates would be illuminated by flashing red and blue lights, and after the sirens died away, an eerie silence would remain. Every episode served as a warning that the harmony in that house was brittle and always in danger of collapsing. But on May 5, 2017, things took a drastic turn. At that point, a formal report of domestic abuse was submitted and recorded in police files under the LAPD rules for a family-related inquiry. Although the specifics of that incident were never made public, it was sufficient to mark a sea change. The matter had become too serious to be written off as another quarrel. Nick's difficulties were no longer limited to him after that. They started to impact everyone in his vicinity. In 2019, there were 2 additional calls, one for another welfare check in February, and another for a male resident's alleged mental health issue in September, according to the police. The most disturbing aspect was how comfortable the officers had grown with the Reiner address, even though they ultimately determined that no additional action was required. Life was no longer tranquil within the gates of that multimillion-dollar estate. It was a vicious cycle of fatigue, hope, and terror. Years of mounting tension had been silently witnessed by the walls that had shielded the family. Every police visit represents a new instance where everything almost went wrong. In Brentwood, the Reiner residence has become a calm outlier in a community where police sirens are seldom ever heard. The officers were familiar with the route leading to that mansion. They knew the lush hedges, the huge white gate, and the unsettling silence that seemed to permeate the whole place. Every time someone called that address, they handled the issue coolly, answered the phone, and then discreetly left, leaving behind a property that appeared to be in excellent condition but was actually rife with trouble. The mayhem within those opulent walls did not necessarily manifest itself in riotous eruptions for years. Whispers, shouting in the middle of the night, and unsettling silences that erupted at strange hours were how it was communicated. Occasionally, neighbors would hear echoes of little disputes, cross the street, or get a glimpse of Nick roaming the property at night, his face blank, his eyes far away. By juggling love and fear, Rob and Michelle learned to live in constant suspense, hoping that tomorrow would be the day when things finally improved. However, on December 14th, 2025, that hope came to an end. Suddenly, a distinct pattern emerged from all those earlier calls: welfare checks, noise concerns, and midnight interventions. All along, they had been cautions. Love and instability ultimately collided in the house that previously exuded warmth and laughter. The realization that the same love that held the family together also prevented them from seeing the danger that was developing within is heartbreaking. Once a representation of achievement and loyalty, the Reiner's residence became a site where an excessive amount of love, hope, and denial reached a breaking point. In retrospect, every police complaint, every sleepless night, and every anxious look appears like a link in a chain that eventually leads to something that nobody wanted to think was possible. However, not many individuals were aware of this. It had been years since Nick Reiner had been in the main mansion. Surrounded by gardens and thick walls, he remained in a separate guest house on the estate, a stunning location valued at millions. He never paid a dime for living expenses in spite of his hardships. His parents provided him with food and all the necessities, as well as a substantial monthly allowance of about $10,000. Rob and Michelle had built their lives around attempting to aid in his recovery. They kept a close eye on his conduct, made frequent check-ins, and modified their own schedules in response to his progress. They were aware of his mental health struggles, mood swings, and relapses. However, as parents, their natural tendency was to shield rather than punish. According to acquaintances, Nick has been diagnosed with schizophrenia and has spent at least 18 separate spells in treatment throughout the years. His parents' support remained unwavering in spite of everything. They had survived innumerable storms, damage to property, restless nights, times when he vanished, and spent brief times living on the streets. Nevertheless, nobody in their social group ever perceived Nick as violent. The Reiner home was a place of warmth, humor, and limitless second chances for everyone who knew them. Their home was frequently referred to by close friends as a big love fest, a location where family dinners became lengthy discussions and forgiveness was effortless. Only 3 months remained until September 9th, 2025, when everything collapsed. At the red carpet premiere of This Is Final Tap 2, the end continues at the Egyptian Theater in Los Angeles. The whole family showed up together. As the cameras flashed, Rob and Michelle grinned broadly and put their arms around their kids, Nick, Jake, and Romy. They appeared to be the epitome of contentment in Hollywood. The last time the public will ever see them all together was that evening. According to individuals close to the family, Rob and Michelle were quite concerned behind those cheery faces. They had seen that Nick's condition was rapidly deteriorating once more. His erratic emotions, his mood swings, and his increasingly difficult to ignore moments of detachment. Despite their intense love for their son, love was unable to protect them from what was about to happen. Rob and Michelle told close friends that they were afraid of their son in the weeks leading up to the disaster. Speaking quietly, they described Nick as erratic and occasionally even called a ticking time bomb for him. They were so terrified that they felt unsafe leaving him at home by themselves. For this reason, they insisted on inviting him to Conan O'Brien's yearly Christmas party. The occasion was as exquisite and joyous as usual, despite the fact that he wasn't on the guest list. Soft jazz was playing beneath the pleasant murmur of laughter, and guests were dressed in sparkling gowns and dark suits. One person, however, stood out among the others in stark contrast to the glitz. Nick Reiner, 32, was wearing a gray hoodie with the hood pulled up, and he looked pale and thin. His vacant eyes darted across the space, never staying focused for very long. He appeared disoriented, as if someone who was out of place. Since they couldn't leave Nick alone that evening, Rob and Michelle had obtained Conan's permission to bring him. However, Nick fully distanced himself from them and the other guests as soon as they arrived. He moved like a shadow through the celebration, silently watching from corners, muttering to himself, and shocking everyone with his expressionless gaze. Then the moment that made everyone uneasy arrived. In a flat, impersonal tone, he began repeatedly asking folks the same question. "Are you well known?" It was no idle curiosity. People were left stuck in awkward stillness by a mechanical loop that lacked humor and a smile. Visitors attempted to shrug it off, but the tension increased as he said it repeatedly. Some claimed he would enter their talks without permission, hover too close, and stare fixedly. The once warm holiday atmosphere started to turn chilly and unpleasant. Actor Bill was once approached by Nick, who repeated the query and asked for his complete name. "Are you well known?" before saying nothing more and turning away. The celebration was affected by that odd behavior. People started to move to the opposite side of the room, whisper, and look at each other anxiously. Nick roamed the room like a restless ghost, without eating or drinking. Rob finally became impatient. He yelled at Nick in front of everyone, embarrassed and frustrated, ordering him to stop acting out, to be respectful, and to stop making people feel uncomfortable. As the conflict developed, the room fell silent. Michelle intervened in an attempt to defuse the situation, but her expression was one of sadness and helplessness. Few parents could possibly fathom the agony of publicly reprimanding a son they love, because they are at a loss on what to do. The family discreetly left the celebration a little while later. There was a lot of silence on the way home. Rob and Michelle's final public appearance was something none of them could have predicted. That persistent query, "Are you well known?" would reverberate indefinitely, like to a warning that nobody comprehended until it was much too late. However, this is not just a story of one person's collapse. It tells the story of a family's fight against unseen hardships that have been carried down through the centuries. And that leads us to something very intimate that a lot of people ignore. Romy herself battled despair and addiction at one point. Romy said in a 2022 podcast that she had been affected by the same shadows that plagued Nick. She talked openly about her adolescence, recalling times when she was unable to leave her bed and when nightmares and anxiety made every night feel like a battlefield. "In my dreams, I struggled to stay alive," she remarked. Romy finally came to a heartbreaking realization. "Sometimes I dream I have to hurt people just to escape." Those weren't words of violence. They were the cries of someone who had lived through years of emotional turmoil. The same secret struggle had been carried by her father. For the majority of his life, Rob Reiner struggled with depression. It wasn't transient melancholy. It was a silent burden he bore throughout his life despite pursuing a successful career, raising his kids, and producing works of art that had an impact on millions of people. He had discovered how to endure suffering and carry on even when the darkness never completely went away. Romy started to recognize herself in him as she grew older. The same routines, the same emotional burden, the same calm perseverance. She wasn't shocked to learn that she had the same issue. It simply reaffirmed what she had always suspected. The Reiners appeared flawless, well-known, prosperous, and adored from the outside. She once remarked, "You don't inherit through blood. You inherit them through silence." On the inside, however, their tale was one of tenacity, continually put to the test by invisible storms. It served as a reminder that no amount of wealth or notoriety can protect someone from emotional suffering. Rob fought it in silence. Nick lost himself in it when Romy publicly faced it. It was not just Nick's mental disorder that was tragic. It was his coping mechanism. He turned to addiction as a means of escape, and each time he descended more, the walls surrounding him tightened. A vulnerable person isn't recovering when they use drugs to numb their suffering. Their misery is getting worse. What starts off as a means of numbing the pain quickly turns into a trap. Few people discuss the additional layer that lies behind it all. How excessive protection can subtly lay the groundwork for self-destruction. Nick had grown up in luxury, surrounded by wealth, and seldom had to deal with the fallout from his deeds. What was intended to be protection and love became something quite else. His addiction was able to flourish because of the constant pampering and escape from reality. That cycle persisted for more than 10 years. Assistance, relapse, forgiveness, and so on. Every effort to save him just made the family's heartache worse. Ultimately, their demise was not caused by a lack of love. It was limitless love, the kind that keeps giving until there's nothing left to give. Drugs were no longer merely a means of escape for Nick Reiner. Even though they damaged him, they became a regular routine, a habit, and something that felt safe. He resorted to that same crutch whenever things got out of hand. And the sad part, the love of his family. Unknowingly, their incessant need to keep him safe contributed to the continuation of that pattern. They weren't reckless or blind. They were parents forced to choose between enabling and protecting their children. When you love someone too much, two forces might resemble each other uncomfortably. Nick's struggle with mental illness had a long history. Years before, he had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a serious illness that results in warped thinking, disorientation, and delusions. However, that was just one aspect of the storm. A life on the verge of disaster results from a lengthy history of heroin, cocaine, and meth use that dates back to his adolescence and at least 18 separate efforts at rehabilitation. Something significant occurred in the weeks preceding December 14, 2025. Nick's physicians changed his prescription. It was later established by sources that his antipsychotic prescription had been modified around 3 to 4 weeks before to the occurrence. Instead of stabilizing him, what was meant to do so made him spiral even more. Family members claimed to have seen the change right away. His behavior got more erratic, his mood swings more severe, and his outbursts more difficult to control. Michelle and Rob thought they were walking on glass. Every day, I hope the new medicine will help, but I'm secretly afraid it might be too late. He grew agitated, erratic, and occasionally terrifyingly aloof. A moment of quiet, followed by an unexpected outburst of emotion. It was like living next to a fuse that they couldn't see, but knew was burning quickly for parents who had given their everything. The case is currently being handled by well-known lawyer Alan Jackson, who previously defended Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein. According to reports, Jackson is drafting a defense of not guilty by reason of insanity. Nick would avoid going to jail if that argument was successful. Rather, he would be sent to a secure mental health facility for obligatory treatment, possibly for the remainder of his life or until he is judged stable enough to live independently. According to California law, the insanity defense is only applicable if the defendant's mental disease prevented them from understanding what they were doing or telling right from wrong at the time of the act. That notion is significantly supported in Nick's situation by his recent drug change, lengthy treatment history, and schizophrenia diagnosis. His care at a prestigious mental health hospital had cost his parents over $70,000 a month, evidence of their sincere attempts to assist. However, winning such a case is incredibly uncommon despite all of that. In the U.S., only approximately 1% of criminal defendants even try to enter an insanity plea, and only a small percentage of those are successful, particularly in California, where jurors have a tendency to be skeptical. The prosecution can contend that Nick's chronic substance usage impairs his judgment, regardless of his mental disorder, reducing the strength of his legal defense. However, his defense team may still be able to negotiate a plea agreement by highlighting his schizophrenia and medication change. Instead of a typical prison sentence, there might be a transfer to a mental health facility or a reduction from first-degree charges to something like voluntary manslaughter. The trial is currently on hold while additional psychiatric assessments are conducted. Furthermore, Jackson has not formally announced a defense plan. January 7th is the next scheduled court date, a date that might decide how the rest of the story plays out. But this incident raises unsettling considerations outside of the courtroom as well. How many alerts go unnoticed? How many opportunities did we have to back off before things got out of control? And how often do families like the Reiners cry out for assistance just to fall between the gaps between the system that is supposed to protect them and love? Rob Reiner is at the center of it all. Not merely a director, but a very kind individual who has always pursued empathy in his life and integrity in his art. Despite